This is the final section in the Roughages part of this week's online learning material. We're going to talk a little bit about hay and silage and wrap up a little bit with some of the crop residues and how those are used in animal feeding systems. The main thing we're going to do is talk about defining what hay is. We'll visit more about the specific types of hays in our activities and whatnot, but we need to understand that when we talk about the term hay, we're talking about a forage that is preserved via curing or field drying to be fed at a later date. This process dates clear back to 750 BC, and our nutrient cost is much higher than grazing because we are now forcing mechanization and using machines to harvest the forage as opposed to having the animal do it ourselves. And generally, whenever you do something like that and you're harvesting it to store later, you're going to have losses in quality. It's inevitable. You're going to lose leaves, you're going to get it rained on, or something's going to happen that is not going to be the same quality. The nice thing about hay is that it's easy to transport and fairly easy to store. When we talk about the hay making process, you'll notice the top picture here. We have a swather, and that is going through and cutting down the forage and laying it into what we call windrows. That's what these big long rows are windrows. And then depending on what size of a bale or type of a bale that the producer is trying to get, whether it's these big square bales like you see in the second picture or round bales, another tractor, once it's dry to about 18-20% moisture, another tractor is going to come through and follow these windrows, picking those up and compressing them into this bale that we see right here. On the big bales or the square bales, the last step of hay production is hay removal. And in this case, we see a harrow bed coming in and picking up some 3-twine, probably alfalfa bales, and it's going to block it and create blocks so that it's easily stacked and removed. Again, there's several types. You can see square balers, round balers, small balers, big balers, a variety depending on the region and the purpose that you're trying to accomplish. The second major preserved forage that we're going to deal with is silage. And silage is forage that is preserved via fermentation. Think about sauerkraut. Sauerkraut actually was developed as a way to preserve cabbage and vegetables for people by chopping it up really fine, packing it in a little bit of sugar and removing all the oxygen and allowing it to ferment or preserve itself. Same with silage. It's excellent for preserving high moisture crops. When I was down in Florida, they made a lot of silage, and you can also make what's called haylage, which is a field dry, like you let it dry for a day or two and then bale it. But for high moisture crops or crops that you can't get dry, because Florida, it rained all the time and you'd never be able to put up a hay crop, this process makes a lot of sense. It does require specialized feeding. You generally, for the most part, feedlots and dairies are the most common users of a silage or haylage product because of the increased mechanization, and they have animals, they're feeding them daily, they're mixing feed, those kinds of things. It pencils out for them to utilize this product. When we talk about the silage process, the first step is actually going out into the field, and in this case, corn silage, they have a chopper that's chopping the whole forage. So it's the plant and the seeds and the corn on the cob, everything is getting chopped up into a wagon, and that wagon will be coming in, like in the second picture, and dumping it in front of a bunker. And then there's going to be tractors that their job is to stack it and pack it. That's all they do. And their whole job is to try to remove as much oxygen out of that stack of chopped corn plant as possible. And that's going to allow the proper bacteria to grow and develop and to work on that through the fermentation process, ultimately creating a stable product. And then finally, the last phase is feeding it out, having that specialized equipment to be able to feed out that silage product. So silage is high moisture. It's a good way to preserve a crop. Cows love it. It's very palatable. And finally, we're just going to spend the last few minutes visiting about crop residues. This is actually a picture of cottonseed hulls that I mentioned earlier. Whoops. that I mentioned earlier that we used as a roughage source. It's not a forage, but it's a residue from the cottonseed industry and can be a very useful feed tool. The other picture that's more common is like in Iowa and the Midwest, where there's a lot of corn grown and the ground is able to freeze. They will actually graze their cows on corn stalks throughout the off cycle. So it allows them to get some organic matter back into the soil because the cow's hoof action is going to push those corn plants into the soil. The cows are going to defecate and urinate and put nutrients back into that soil. And that allows them to get some more nutrients into the soil, and before they have to get ready to be able to go in and get set up for the next annual crop they're going to be putting in. It works extremely well. Out here we don't do this as much because we don't freeze. The ground doesn't freeze as hard as it does out there, and we risk damaging the soil and causing more compaction because the ground doesn't freeze over the winter. Out in the Great Basin region in like Nevada and Utah, alfalfa stubble is used and grazed quite a bit by beef producers. After the last cutting of alfalfa, they can move out there for a while, clean up the fields, provide nutrients back to that soil, and they'll pull the cattle when it gets time to start letting that new crop of alfalfa grow. Very useful. So crop residues are very beneficial in grazing programs. That should wrap up our roughage section. Move on to the next section, which I think is going to be protein supplements.